This is on. Yeah, this is on. Okay, great. I put doctor because my position, as I say, is adversarial. It's not on the cover of this book. This whole talk is based around the book, and what I've done is taken the three most contentious points that have arisen from the book and condensed them down for what I hope fits into a 45, 50-minute format, and happy to take any questions and stuff like this. The first pages of the book read, I would like to thank the members and moderators of the 38 so-called recovery sites which have blocked me over the last 8 years. They blocked me merely for querying the cliches and metaphors that have characterised discussion about drug addiction and alcoholism for the past century. Every one of these blockings served to reinforce my conviction that there must be something very wrong indeed with the received wisdom that I was so persistently prevented from discussing in open forums. Now, so the book was published in February of last year, now I've been blocked from 7 more. And I wanted to go through with you the principal reasons for the blockings and to see what you might make of them. The first one, I don't really have to do much with. The first category consists of, you are a fucking knobhead. You are such a total cunt, you should be shot. And so, I had 3 death threats while I was writing the book. I was working for the university, and so they insisted that I take it to the police. It's a matter of policy or whatever. I didn't take them seriously. They let it go, and I pointed out all 3 of them are written by Americans, and written so badly and punctuated so abominably that there was no chance any of these guys would ever get a passport. So I was fine. The second category comes up, I wouldn't say as often as the first category, but it came up a lot. And it went like this: you're not a real doctor. Okay, so what is a real doctor? What do the public think about when they think about a real doctor?
A GP.
A GP, a doctor of medicine, yeah. Absolutely. Now the fact of the matter is, most medical doctors are not doctors. They don't have a doctorate. A doctor is somebody who has a PhD, a thesis, a doctor. But since the Enlightenment and the subsequent years after, because I'm suggesting as a culture, we have begun to privilege our bodies far more than our minds or our spirits or our souls or whatever you might want to call that part of us which isn't physical, then the real doctor has become the doctor who looks after our bodies, right? The third category is allied to the first, and it says something like, how dare you criticize some of the finest neuroscientific minds of our age, like Carl Hart or Mark Lewis, etc. Or how dare you query the findings of an eminent sociologist like Emmett Goldberg, etc. They go like that. And they are all really versions of the same thing. Who are you, a philosopher, to talk about addiction? And my position is, who are you to talk about addiction? What do you know that's more important than what I know? Now, if I could just make a general summary here, let's assume none of you knew anything about cars. You might drive them, but you haven't got a fucking clue how to fix them if they go wrong, right? Okay. So you're in your driveway, it's in the morning, the car just won't start. Who do you first think of calling?
A mechanic.
A mechanic, okay. What you don't, I'm going to cut through this just to say, you don't think of calling, for example, a lion tamer. You don't think of calling a marine biologist. Right now, you may have all the respect in the world for these particular professions, but what you do know at that very moment is neither of them are of any fucking use to you right now. What you need is somebody who knows something about how engines work, car engines. All right, now all I'm doing is standing back from the current fray and saying neuroscience, for all its brilliance, has nothing to do with drug addiction or alcoholism. Sociology has something to say, but it doesn't know any more than philosophy, and so on, and so on. That the real medical doctor, that's to say your MD is only interested in the consequences of addiction. And we have become a culture, I'm arguing, that can't separate consequences from causes with the ease it once used to, when it wasn't, in other words, quite as fucking lazy. But a doctor could cut off a man's leg if that man had been so pissed he'd fallen under a bus. What he can't be possibly expected to understand is why this man got so blind drunk he fell under a bus. And why should he? It's not part of his training or her training. To look to medical doctors for any information about causation is a complete waste of time. And the same is true of neuroscience. They can see that cocaine rushes to the brain, and through imaging they can see the pleasure centre where it's kicking off. But what they don't know is why this person takes so much cocaine they become addicted to it. And this is what I'm suggesting all the various disciplines who have queried my credibility in talking about addiction. Because I am a doctor of philosophy. And what philosophy has been for the last 100 years, since the work really of Ludwig Wittgenstein, the Austrian philosopher, language and philosophy have been interchangeable. That's what philosophers study. The use of language, how we use it, what it means. And so my book is called Narratives of Addiction, because it's about the words we use and the stories we tell and the myths we subscribe to when it comes to addiction. I mean, they are, I would suggest, my academic qualifications for offering such a talk. My personal ones are that I have myself been a drug addict and an alcoholic, not at the same time. I lacked those skills. But at different times and in different continents, I have been a drug addict and an alcoholic. My father was an alcoholic. One of my earliest memories, certainly one of the ones that stayed vividly with me, was playing in the front lawn of our garden in Christchurch in New Zealand. And my father was in the Air Force, we'd been based there. I was playing. I looked up and I saw my dad being carried home on a door. 4 blokes, each corner of the door. And when they got close to our front door, they tilted slightly so that Dad slid down the door and his feet hit our front door, and then they scarpered off with the door. Now, it turns out later that Dad had got so drunk that he passed out on the floor of the pub. They had no stretchers or anything like that, so with good Kiwi ingenuity, they unbolted the front door of the pub, put Dad on it, and carried him home. And for a long time afterwards, whenever I saw people coming home, men coming home from work, wherever it was, and they would just take their keys out and unlock the door and walk in, or it would open before they got there and some woman would come out and hug them. And I used to think that's a very unique way of coming home, isn't it? We used to be able to tell how pissed Dad was by the music he listened to. And if he started off in the early evening, and it was stuff off the radio, the Beatles or something like that, or traditional Irish songs, Galway Bay and all this kind of stuff, we're thinking, okay, things are fine, he's having a few beers. But then when the music changed, we knew he'd moved on to wine, because now he was playing Irish Republican ballads and shit like that, and stomping around the living room, that fucking queen of bitch, all this kind of stuff, turned into a real kind of IRA supporter and all the rest of it. And that was okay too. But then later on, we'd know he'd hit the whiskey when he started playing nothing but American country music. That song's about dying dogs and old horses that had to be shot, and he loved busloads of blind orphans coming off a cliff and crashing into a home full of children with special needs. He would play this over and over again, right? Now, I'm guessing that most families have got an alky uncle, probably one with vaguely paedophiliac tendencies. This seems to be true of most families. I had 6 uncles, all of whom were alcoholic. My dad was an alcoholic. All of his 6 brothers were alcoholics. My father's father was an alcoholic. I was an alcoholic. Now, based on this, millions of pounds have been wasted trying to find a genetic connection, trying to find or prove that the addiction gene is passed down through generations, through DNA, through blood cells, whatever. This is insufficient evidence, it seems to me. No evidence whatsoever has ever been demonstrated, shown, to show any kind of single gene or constellation of genes that carries a propensity to addiction. Never, not once. It's completely fallacious that a percentage of alcoholism and drug addiction are genetically enhanced or genetically present. People like to believe it, though. The truth of the matter is this. I mean, the show is called Addiction, the Truth. The truth of it is this. Alcoholics and drug addicts make terrible parents. Their children grow up feeling unloved, second best, as indeed they are. As we all know, sadly, some are even abused, physically, sexually, emotionally. They're neglected. They are the very people who, when it comes to seek comfort, immediate, reassuring, accessible comfort, they are the ones who turn to it. And they've seen their parents use it too. There's no genetic connection there. My father used to get so pissed that he would watch the same films over and over again, forgetting that he'd watched them in the first place. And his favourite films were westerns. And I watched many a western with him. And his favourite westerns would always involve a scene that, even if I'm guessing the genre is fading out of public interest really, but you must have all seen it sometime in your lives. Some cowboy riding into town, hitching up his horse, going through those really complicated doors those American saloons have that go backwards and forwards, you know, the backward doors at the same time. You get a cowboy, for example, he's clearly been riding for weeks, massive stubble, and the sun is directly above his head. It must be 40 degrees out there. All you can see are dead cacti and mounds of bleached buffalo bones and stuff like that, just to show you how fucking hot it is. He rides into town, tied up his horse, goes into the saloon. What would you ask for in those circumstances, madam?
What would I ask for?
Yeah, what would you ask the barman for?
As myself or as
No, as yourself.
I probably want a cold beer.
A Coke?
Cold beer.
Cold beer.
Water.
Water.
Yeah, I think cold beer is
Yeah.
perfect.
What do you think the cowboy asked for?
Whiskey.
Whiskey. He says, give me a whiskey. Never any manners in these things, have you noticed? No, please. Give me a whiskey. The barman pours him a whiskey that to us would be an octuple, right? That's not enough for the cowboy. He grabs the barman's hand and says, leave the bottle. The bottle of whiskey. The bottle of whiskey is big as that fucking chair. And your man takes it over the corner and slowly starts downing this whiskey. And the clock's ticking, and we can tell something's going to happen. And by the time the cowboy's finished 3/4 of that bottle of whiskey, he hears, nobody else can hear, he hears something out in the street. He gets to his feet and puts on his hat, finishes the rest of the bottle of whiskey. And as he walks out, he flips a coin at the barman without even checking to see if it's enough to cover the amount of that obviously imported whiskey. Right, just chucks it over there. Managed to get through those doors, which I would never have done in my life. And indeed, when I looked at them, I used to think, You'd never be able to carry my dad home on those doors. He gets out into the street, and in the main street, which is deserted, you can only see townsfolk peering behind their windows. There's a killer waiting for him. And you know he's a killer because he's all dressed in black. And I'm thinking to myself, mate, it must be 70 degrees out there. Don't wear black. Wear taupe or khaki or lemon. But we know he's a killer. He goes for his gun. Our guy, who, don't forget, has just sunk an entire jerboa of whiskey, manages to outdraw and puts a bullet right between his eyes, rides out of town. And I used to think, if that was me and I just drunk a whole bottle of whiskey in that heat, I would have shot the horse and tried to ride the bloke out of town. It's that kind of manliness that culturally is being eroded, largely by government intervention, but also by more responsible drinks manufacturers who don't try and push any more the idea that it's manly to drink. In fact, Dan's got a whole routine about it. This is how much the culture's changed since I was young. But it does raise questions, for me, alcoholism raises questions about the doctor's involvement. When do you think the first formal statement by a medical doctor claiming that alcoholism was a disease was first published, read, and acted upon? The very first. Okay, 1920s, 1950s.
It might be really recent.
Sorry, might be more recent.
20 years ago?
20 years ago, so 2000 millennium. Okay, the first book that was published, no, I've lost it, it's in there somewhere. The first book, trust me, I'm a doctor. The first book ever published claiming that alcoholism was a disease was published in 1794. 1794. It was written by Dr. Benjamin Rush, and Rush was considered so high, so eminent a physician, that he was one of the signers of the American Declaration of Independence. That's how important a man he was, along with future presidents and cabinet ministers. 1794. In 1805, a Scots doctor called James Trotter published a book called Alcoholism as Illness. And both of them argued that alcoholism was due to a paralysis of the will. The default assumption was that the alcoholic wanted to remain sober, but when they saw a drink, they just couldn't help but take it. So the word alcoholism was coined as long ago as 1859. So the idea that it's been a disease has been around since the end of the 18th century. And it's lasted right up until now. And still, one of the complaints I get the most is me rejecting the theory that it's any kind of disease. It's not a disease. It's not transmissible. You can't catch it, if you like. It ticks none of the boxes. Anybody know what the name of the people, the trade name of the people who diagnose diseases are? There's no reason why you would. They're called nosologists. Nosologists classify diseases. They pass their information on to people who are called epidemiologists. The epidemiologists pass that information on to regular doctors. Not one nosologist has ever published a book about alcoholism or drug addiction. Same with epidemiology. They both know they're not diseases. The reason we want them to be a disease is one of the issues that lies behind my book. As well as disease, I want us to strike all associated words to do with illness. Alcoholics are not ill, they're not sick, they don't have a disease. They don't relapse, they don't recover, they don't get rehabilitated. All of these words are taken from a medical vocabulary, and all of them are inappropriate. Consider, for example, I just take one or two examples from each area I'm looking at. But, for example, relapse. Somebody you know has been sober for a while, and then after a few years they pick up a drink, say, or a few months they pick up a drink. And people say, he's relapsed. But a relapse is a return of an illness. And this is not an illness. What I propose is something like this. Could you just imagine a drug dealer sitting at his table, he's got a cup of tea beside him, he's got some sugar cubes next to the tea, he's got little packets of cocaine there that he's going to crumble the sugar cubes into to bulk the product out, right? So it's like happy domestic scenario, really. And it's rudely interrupted when one of the neighbours, who knows he's a drug dealer, lobs a stone through his window. Several things happen. The stone flies through the window, hits the coffee mug tips over and falls on top of the sugar cubes. All right? Now, when that rock goes through that glass, it doesn't leave a little round rock hole, does it? What happens to the pane of glass? It shatters. That's what we call the dispositional quality of glass. The dispositional quality. Looked at, it's solid. But change the external circumstances and it shatters. As with the sugar. When the coffee falls on the sugar, what does the sugar do? It dissolves. It looks solid until external circumstances change, and then its dispositional quality comes to the fore. This is how we should think of alcoholism and drug addiction. They're not recovering drug addicts. They're not recovering alcoholics. They are dispositional alcoholics. If circumstances change, they go back to this dispositional quality they have, which is to turn to drugs or alcohol when things get unpleasant for them. This has got nothing to do with medicine. All of those words have to go. I would also like to say something about we are just as bad, in a way. I say we, I mean the general public. The 90% of us who are not medical doctors or psychologists or psychiatrists or anything like that, social workers, those of us who are not involved at all, we still contribute to what I see as an alarming rise in deaths. I should say this, that when I say I'm Dr. Kevin McCArron and all these people are wrong and so on, I'm not trying to be clever. What I'm trying to do, in all honesty, hand on my heart, is save some lives. People are dying unnecessarily because they're not thinking clearly. And one of the jobs philosophy has is to encourage clarity of thought. There are phrases I'm about to use that we've all heard and probably even used. Something like, how about this? She was introduced to heroin at university. He was introduced to heroin at high school. I mean, yesterday I was introduced to a radio presenter. I didn't start immediately injecting him. The word introduced is a fake word. You can't be introduced to heroin. It's like experimenting. She began experimenting with drugs in high school. The word I would use instead of experimenting is she began taking drugs. She began sampling drugs. But when you put experiment in the context of a high school or a university, it starts to make it look natural. They're young people. They're experimenting. Of course, that's what young people do. But they're not experimenting. They're consuming. They're taking. They're sampling until they find the one that does the job just right for them. Unfortunately, in my case, it was heroin. The one that I fell for big time was heroin. And the reason I fell for heroin was because I had experienced nothing before that was as good as heroin. Nothing made me feel as euphoric, as content, as relaxed. One of the great cliches of our time is that alcoholics and drug addicts use drugs and alcohol to numb the pain. To numb the pain. This is one of the most dangerous cliches of our time. If, God forbid, sir, you would have an operation next week and it was going to hurt. They would anaesthetise you, wouldn't they? We would hope. Even today in the NHS, we would hope they might anaesthetise you. Why would they anaesthetise you? Just say it was on your leg, you see.
So I wouldn't feel the pain.
So you wouldn't feel anything, you would be numb. Do you think when somebody's knocking back 9 pints of cider, they feel numb? No, they feel fucking great. They feel absolutely brilliant, because that's what getting pissed feels like. It feels good. And so does shooting up heroin, and so does taking OxyContin, and so does snorting cocaine. What we have to get rid of is the myth that addicts are fleeing from pain, or trying to numb the pain, or dull the pain. What they're doing is rushing towards pleasure. That's the goal of the addict, pleasure. And this is why I'm arguing other disciplines are not as actually good as philosophy and literature at understanding how it feels to be drunk, how it feels to be on a heroin high. That our language is littered with examples of casual speech which all contribute to this problem. For example, how many of you have heard the phrase, indeed they write it inside cigarette packets now, alcohol is a highly addictive substance? We all know this phrase. Is it true?
Yeah.
Is it true that alcohol is a highly addictive substance?
Yes.
Okay. Is that a drink? Is that alcohol you've got there?
No.
No. Anybody drinking alcohol? You are. And Debs, you would not call yourself an alcoholic.
No, I wouldn't call myself.
No, I mean Nick does, but I'm kidding.
Could be a lot of things.
What I'm saying is, if we think about it, and this is what I'm saying philosophy does, of course, if you think about it, alcohol cannot possibly be a highly addictive substance because 90% of the population drink it and 90% of the population are not alcoholics. For that sentence to be true, you need to say something like, alcohol is a highly addictive substance to some people. Now though, we've got rid of the substance and we're looking at the person. Here's another myth that circulates both in England and in the United States. It's even more popular in the United States. This is where a group of drug addicts hear that somebody has just overdosed from some gear they bought off Billy, who lives in Kent Town, just shows it. And the myth goes that the junkies then all race round the Billies because he's got the gear so good that you can die from it, right? That is actually what we're told. It's so good, the stuff is the fire. Let's go around the Billies and get some. The truth of it is, that's not what happens. Seasoned street junkies, they don't ask any questions at all about the product. They don't think about how good that shit must be. What questions, using their common sense, what questions do you think a group of seasoned junkies might ask themselves?
How much is it?
Sorry?
How much does it cost?
No, that's really part of the first, shit, this stuff's good, let's get some. That would be part of that. Anybody else, what would you think?
How much did they take?
How much did they take? And not only how much did they take, are they regular users? Was she from out of town? Has she just come out of rehab and used the same amount she used before she went in and underestimated its strength? And so there are half a dozen questions that junkies would ask before they started investigating the product. Now what Western governments have done for 150 years is not even have the common sense of drug addicts. They have declared war on the substances. What was Prohibition? Prohibition ran from 1919 to 1932. A massive social failure. There's virtually no defensible position for Prohibition. It fucked everything up. And some argue it fucked up Americans' respect for the law. This went very deep indeed, right inside the American psyche. And what's the war on drugs? but the continuation of that disastrous policy. The war on drugs is nothing more than an attack on the substance. Why don't we start thinking about the very small percentage of people who take too much of that substance? It's not the substance's fault. It's the people who take its fault. But we don't like fault. We don't like blame. We certainly don't like attaching it to individuals. Here's another distinction we don't make anymore. We've all done it. I now have trained myself to not do it, to the immense irritation of my girlfriend. But I no longer use the word judge when I mean criticise. There's a big difference between the two words. And people have said to me, you've got no right to judge me. And I say, you're absolutely right. And I'm not judging you. I'm not judging you, I'm criticising you. That's the difference. You have to have some authority to be able to judge. Even a child's drawing competition at school, the judge has the power to make this first prize, this second, and this third. The judge in a courtroom has the power to send somebody down or put them on remand. Judging requires authority. If you have no authority, you're just a spectator. But that doesn't mean you can't criticise. But because we're no longer able to distinguish between judgment and criticism, we do neither. Why shouldn't we criticise somebody for lying soaked in their own piss outside a schoolyard? Why shouldn't we say this is unacceptable behaviour? Sort yourself out, you fuckhead. We should be able to say this is not acceptable social behaviour. There are all kinds of other, have we heard this? Unfortunately for my dead sister, she fell in with the wrong crowd. Nobody falls in with the wrong crowd. I've actually written in there, since drug taking alcoholism began, 2,500, since the beginning of recorded time, no drug addict or no alcoholic has ever fallen in with the wrong crowd. What you have to do to get into the wrong crowd is the very opposite. You have to apply. You have to apply to the wrong crowd before they let you join. You know who falls in? Everybody else. Doing the right thing is falling in. That's why when soldiers are on parade and they're told to fall in, that means do what everybody else is doing. You have to go out of your way to join the wrong crowd. You have to listen to the right music. Drugs are illegal. It's not as though some kid at university is just going to stroll into a group of heroin users and they're going to say, oh yeah, let's shoot up in front of them. But in the real world, which is what I'm talking about, the truth, the reality of it, the way the world actually works, some kids would spend weeks, even months, before they were accepted into the group that takes heroin. That's how nobody falls in with the wrong crowd. What about, you may have heard this phrase too, it's often accompanied by these really funny rehab ads that have some guy with a Sikh turban on, and he'll be next to a kind of judge with the wigs and stuff like that. Some other guys, like a labourer on a building site, and a woman with 2 kids, and the ad will read, addiction does not discriminate. We've seen this sort of thing. To which I reply, well, yes, that's true. Addiction doesn't discriminate. It's true in the same way that it's true to say it's hard to shave a unicorn's balls. That's the kind of sense it makes. No sense. No sense. Of course, addiction doesn't discriminate. It doesn't drive cars either, or bake cakes, or take a dog for a walk. It's an abstract noun. It can't do anything. Addiction doesn't discriminate. What that means is this Sikh guy is an alkie, and the judge is an alkie, and the mother of 2 is an alkie, and so is the guy on the building site. They're all alkies. They're alcoholics at every level of society. That's not addiction, not discriminating. That's people who like to drink too much, and you'll find them everywhere, every ethnicity, every social class, and so on. All of it bullshit. Addiction does not discriminate. What Wittgenstein taught us in the 1920s was that we had been wasting too much time on asking questions to which there were no answers, rather than analysing the language of the questions we were asking. And this caused a huge turnaround in the way philosophy worked, so it became primarily a discussion about language. What does it do? How does it work? And we can see connotations, as in, say, experiment with, and so on. They give the illusion of something that's not actually true. What about something like, it looks quite harmless, what about something like needle exchange? Is it an exchange? I mean, the drug addict hands over the dirty needles, the council, whoever it is, hand over the clean ones. Okay, is that an exchange? Why do you think it's not?
Well, because they're getting back, because of exchange, kind of, I don't know, they're getting back something safer than what they're
Good.
giving. So it's
Yes.
not an exact swap.
It's absolutely right. I mean, for me, what I would say is it's the kind of exchange where a kid comes home without his brand new expensive lunchbox because he's exchanged it for half a banana and a dead rat. The parents do not see that as an exchange, nor do we. And nor should we see needle exchange when proposed by governments or councils as an exchange. It's incredibly dangerous and incredibly expensive to get rid of used needles. They are treated as hazardous waste, which they are. Well, how can getting rid of hazardous waste be compared to handing over fresh, sterile, taxpayer-funded needles? Now again, I'm not saying I'm against the practice. Oh, I should have said that. You're about to say something. I'm very happy to take questions in 5 minutes or so, but now is good too.
Well, no, I was just going to say that it does serve a dual purpose, doesn't it? The needle exchange, that it removes the dirty,
Yep.
contaminated needles from people who might accidentally stumble over them.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
it also prevents the users reusing them amongst each other
Exactly.
and spreading
Yeah,
disease. So
That's right.
exchange is really used. It's not like a something that benefits all exchange, but it's just a term. They are exchanging one thing for another.
They are.
It's just
yes.
not like a deal that they're making.
Yeah,
It's,
okay.
it's a service.
Yeah, yeah. The argument, I argued at some length with a Norwegian woman from Oslo who was in charge of handing out needles in Oslo. And we've had this debate on a Norwegian podcast, and the points you raise are perfectly valid, and the ones indeed she raises. What I did point out was the policy is based on absolutely ravaged drug addicts who will share needles, whereas the fact of the matter is, I've known over the years a lot of people who stop using heroin when they realise they're going to have to share a needle. And this, therefore, if you like, encourages people to use, because it's always the availability of fresh, clean needles. So while the disease rate drops, Norway claims, oh, well, our AIDS and other diseases, from sharing needles has dropped. I point out, yes, but for the 9th year running, your deaths from drug abuse have increased. So what do you want here? A few less people with AIDS, or a few less people dying from drug abuse? Did you have a question there, Dave?
No, I was just thinking.
You look pensive all the time.
No, it's thought-provoking.
Yeah, no wonder Nick likes you. And that's a really good look, you know what I mean? That's interesting. That's do you know what I mean? I think I've been slightly thrown by the filming, because I was going to make this funnier, and I have done, honestly. On other nights, I had been funnier, but I actually spent some time this afternoon wondering if these boots went well with these trousers. And I haven't done that for the whole run. Indeed, I'm not sure I've done it in my entire life. but there it is. I did want to tell you a story, though. A couple of you may have heard, I'm sorry if you have, but it's about the way stories about drugs get used in the media and corroborate a lot of these delusions. There was a Norwegian death metal band, and they released an album. And you look, there were like 5 or 6 of them on a cover, the kind of kids you might expect to make an album of Norwegian death metal, you know. And the album was called something like None of Us Has Ever Had a Girlfriend. Anyway, it went to like #1 in the Norwegian death metal charts, which means it probably sold about 8 copies. You know? Anyway, they had this big piss up, a big party to celebrate. Every heavy metal freak, speed metal freak from Scandinavia was at this party. And during the course of the evening, one of the members of the band left the party, broke into a morgue, sawed the head off a corpse, brought it back, a female head, sawed it back, so that made a difference, sawed the head off, brought it back to the party, stuck a spliff in its mouth, right? And everybody partied on. Now, you'll be as pleased as I was to find out not everybody thought this was funny. He was reported. He went to court. I never found out what happened to him because I could not get over his legal team's defence. The sole defence the legal team has was malud, or whatever they say there, malud. My client was high on drugs. And I put the paper down thinking, this is the kind of story that gives drugs a bad name. I've taken a shitload of drugs. Loads and loads and loads of drugs. So many drugs, I wish I hadn't taken some of them. I have never, ever, at the apex of my drug craze confusion, thought, where's my hacksaw? Alexa, where's the nearest morgue? I mean, I'm more likely to look at a biscuit tin and think, I hope that's got some jammy dodgers in it. This is how people take drugs, isn't it? They don't saw heads off corpses. They might shoot up so much they just lie on the couch and do nothing, but they don't go around sawing. You're more likely to be pissed, I would have thought, to do that. That is something else I'd like to finish on, or sort of finish on that. People point out the hypocrisy of the difference in the laws between alcohol and drugs. And you often hear people say, well, alcohol's a more dangerous drug than heroin. Look at the costs of the damage, the divorce courts, the car crashes. When you count it up that way, yeah, alcohol is a more dangerous drug than heroin, say. Why do you think it is we're still allowed to drink but not take heroin? What logic is there? Are they right, the people I argue with, are they right to say this is nothing but hypocrisy? Or is there a reason behind the penalties for heroin possession or consumption being considerably higher than those? And indeed, we can buy a drink if we want to. You can't buy heroin unless you know Billy in Kent Town or whatever. You know. Are they right? Is it hypocrisy?
Well, heroin actually started out as a brand name, didn't it?
It does. But then alcohol does more.
No, I mean, heroin. The name heroin was a brand name initially, so it was a legally available
product. It was
product.
legally available, yes.
Yeah. So.
And then was made illegal.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question we need to ask ourselves then is, good point, why was alcohol allowed to carry on being legal when we stopped heroin being legal?
So there was less social repercussions of people drinking in moderation than there would be people who took heroin.
Yeah, okay, yes. I put it slightly differently, but yes. The fact of the matter is, what we need to recognise is that alcohol is a sociable drug. I mean, half the nation would probably still be single if it wasn't for alcohol. I mean, really, at social gatherings, every one of our major lifetime events is marked in Western culture with alcohol because it makes people sociable. Heroin, on the other hand, is the most deadliest unsociable drug you can take. What you want from heroin is isolation from everybody else. You feel the detachment, the pleasure in not being involved in others' lives. You're cocooned descriptions of it are like lying in a warm bath, perpetually freed from anxiety or worry. Heroin does more damage to the social fabric. I mean, this is essentially the argument. What we should be wary about, I think, is having your right to drink taken away from you by a government who is only concerned with the substance itself and doesn't accept that only a small percentage of people abuse. And you know, when I say drink moderately, what I mean is get pissed a couple of times a week, get absolutely arseholed at a wedding or a funeral or a christening. All of that seems to be moderate drinking. That's fine. But living for alcohol, living for heroin. I mean, my argument here, the philosophical argument I use, is that being a drug addict or being a heroin addict is wrong morally. It's morally wrong to prefer a life of illusion to one of reality. But if any adult is given the choice between the truth and fantasy, they are obliged to choose the truth. I'm not saying 2 hours at the cinema, you know, watching Avengers Assemble. You know, we all need some of that. But when we come out, we live lives as responsible adults. And drug addicts and alcoholics do not live lives of socially responsible people. They are trading on misconceptions, on myths. Oh, they're ill. It also, all this disease stuff, it also stops early interventions. I mean, you could, for example, have a mate who you thought, he's really caning it a bit to the end, say. But some people in your position, they might say, I don't really want to say anything. Alcoholism's a complicated subject. It really needs professional people. He'll have to wait until he hits rock bottom, as they say. There is no rock bottom. Just to finish, there was a woman I read, she was a celebrity of some sort in the paper, and she said, in the depths of my addiction, I gave blowjobs in cars for 20 quid, right? And I'm querying depths. Addiction has no depths. This was a linear progression. She tried heroin. She liked it. She liked it so much she came back for more and more and more and more until she was fully blown addicted, and the only way she could pay for it was giving blowjobs in the back of cars. That's a straight line. The depth thing here is a metaphor. And most of the language used in drug addiction and alcoholism, as I suggest here, metaphors, euphemisms, similes, figures of speech that are designed to obscure the truth. I'm not a great fan of Sigmund Freud, and I do note that people have the wrong idea about him. On the one hand, I'm annoyed with him. On the other hand, I defend him from this. When I say, oh, Freud, he saw symbols and metaphors everywhere, didn't he? He loved that, or cigar, big cock. You know, that's the sort of thing. That's the sort of crude, brutal reductivism you get with Freud. Oh, that beard, that's all pubic hair, so you know. The thing about Freud is he despised metaphors. He loathed symbols. What he wanted was to strip them away to get the truth that lay underneath them. What is this thing standing for in your psyche, was his argument. What is it hiding? And that's what I do, what I'm doing with phrases like experiment with, or introduced, or fell in with the wrong crowd. The way in which they are obscuring the truth for us. And the truth is simple. Addiction is not a complex matter. People have told me it's too complex for you to understand. And I say, fuck off, you moron, and get blocked from yet another side. But it isn't complex, it's quite straightforward. What's complex are the huge array of various voices that have contributed to the debate, have made it messy and complex. But the subject itself is easy. When you walk into a pub and hand over 20 quid to the barman, you're basically saying, I feel shit, make me feel better. You can't buy virtues, you can't buy courage, although I shouldn't be saying this in a pub. I hope it's not what I had for sound, basically. You only would a few minutes. Any questions? Yes.
It's not a question, it's more of a kind of, well, it is a question, but not one I expect you to answer. It's more of a kind of rhetorical question. I do agree with what you said about, alcoholism not being classed as a disease, but it's not a medical condition.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you've got somebody who is alcohol dependent, so somebody who wakes up, has to have a drink to get through the day, because if they were to stop drinking, might
It could kill them. Yes,
kill
absolutely.
them.
Yeah.
We would have to treat that with a medical
I
detox.
totally agree. They would need to be detoxed.
And that would involve taking medication under
Totally.
the supervision of a doctor. So
Absolutely.
maybe, and this is just me playing devil's advocate
Yeah,
a little bit, people say it's a disease because you treat it medically like an illness.
Yes, okay. Yes, I mean, you could argue the logic's back to front. Because we think it's a disease, we treat it like one.
Yeah.
But I still agree. If you get to the stage where then you will need to be detox. I was detoxified. I was at such a state, I was hospitalised for 9 days because I hadn't eaten in a week, maybe longer. I was malnourished, I was dehydrated. I had other problems too. I needed medical attention, absolutely. But as soon as I came out, I thought that was needed, that was medical, but the drinking and the causing of the drinking had nothing to do with medicine.
Can I say, ties into a couple of things you said. You said that like most people live lives of what you call moderate consumption, so maybe getting really drunk a couple of times a week, whatever. But I, as someone who I found it physically overbearing, and I decided to cut it off.
Yeah.
Frequently when I talk to people, and a lot of people I know, as they got older, they tend to drink more and more at home, and it creeps up and becomes an increasing habit. And they speak with some envy about my ability to have cut it off. So are they? I mean, it's a habit. You're saying it's a habit, but it's not an addiction that they're facing, because a lot of people have a habit of drinking too much that worsens gradually over the years because and that includes. And that is also enforced by the social normalisation of alcohol.
Yes, yes.
I mean, the very fact that we're having to come to a drinking den to have these gigs.
Yeah, I know.
And I don't class myself an alcoholic. I'm someone who basically found myself drinking too much. I never thought I had an addiction or a disease.
Yeah.
But I, as a comic, I'm around people drinking all the time. And it actually, because I've reframed the way I think about it, it doesn't ever really bother me.
Yeah, it is.
I don't feel fucked. But I'm not entirely sure that the proliferation and the mass normalisation of alcohol is really that harmless, really. And I'm not saying to ban it, because obviously prohibition was a ridiculous error, and it led to the creation of organised crime.
Indeed, absolutely. Yes.
But I think obviously the thing is, because your arguments are semantic, but as you say, it's a philosophical bent. Like you said about this, addiction doesn't discriminate. That to me is just an advertising phrase, which frequently are. Addiction isn't a person or a character.
That's right. Yeah.
But like go to work on an egg doesn't make sense either. But the advertising phrases, just catchy slogans to encapsulate a concept.
Yeah.
So it sounded like you're kind of it is quite semantic and nitpicky.
Yes.
Some of the stuff you're saying, it doesn't. But I agree with a lot of what you're saying.
Yeah, sure.
Some of it seems a little bit harsh.
Yes.
Towards people going through those issues, I think.
Yeah, indeed, it's one of my number one criticisms.
Yeah.
That you are too harsh. Absolutely, yes. No, I agree.
But then I'd counter that. This is going to sound really awful. That sometimes certain people say, "Oh, well, they've got this problem. It's not their fault."
Yes,
so
exactly.
There's a kind of, for me, there's a kind of balance.
Yes.
That's kind of needed.
What I think is necessary is for the issues I'm raising to be raised at a more public level, if you like, where there can be precisely this kind of discussion. And the difference between prohibition and moderate drinking, but we don't have these discussions.
Sorry, can I say one more thing? Is that right? I've got time. You said about it's not used as medicine, alcohol. It's not used to cure pain. It's used because people want to have a good time. Yeah. But I actually have been through different phases in my life where, as a youngster, and frequently at other times, it's like your boring life. It's fun to get drunk. Let's do that. But I found that the last time around when I was drinking, I've got physical conditions. I've also got quite severe anxiety. And on more than one occasion, I discovered a quick fix to a panic attack, if I'm out and about and getting panicky,
Yeah.
the quickest possible fix
Yeah.
is a nip of
Yeah.
spirits.
Yeah.
And I did use it essentially as a medicine on those occasions.
Okay, fine.
And this wasn't like because I was withdrawing from drinking the day before or
No.
anything.
Oh, no.
This was like literally I might not have had a drink for weeks.
Yeah.
And I was getting really panicky, and the quickest way to not be panicky was a switch. So how is that not using it in a sense as a medicine?
And
Yeah.
that's what people call self-medicating.
Yeah.
Self-medicating. I do think we finish on this. Alcohol and heroin, neither of them are medicines, and therefore it's not possible to self-medicate with either. You are tranquilizing yourself,
Yeah.
and that's painkilling, really, isn't it?
Yes.
But not medicine.
Okay. So
I mean-
then I guess that means like a paracetamol isn't necessarily medicine. It's
That-
more of a-
exactly, yes, that would be my
it
argument.
it masks the symptoms.
Exactly
rather
so,
than-
yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay, I get
Well,
it.
look, I'd like to thank you all for such an incredibly attentive, friendly,
Can we have another hour? 'Cause I need to
lovely
keep going.